Under the vast skies of a fertile valley nestled between the hills, there was a village that time seemed to forget. It was a place where the trees bent gently in the wind like elders whispering stories, and the air was always thick with the scent of earth, rain, and warm smoke from cooking fires. The people here lived in rhythm with the land, rising with the sun and sleeping under stars. Among them was a girl named Ebel. Ebel had been born on a day when the cows returned early from the fields, unprovoked, mooing softly as if guided by an unseen force. Her mother often said it was a sign. The cows knew a spirit child had entered the world. But Ebel never took such praise seriously. She was a simple girl who smiled more often than she spoke and preferred the company of animals to people. Her laugh came easily like wind through millet, and her feet were always bare, stained red with the dust of the earth she loved. She lived with her mother and younger brother in a round mud hut with a thatched roof. Life was not rich in gold, but it overflowed in warmth. Her mother, Nena, was a healer, known for her infusions and gentle hands. Her younger brother, Abadike, was spirited and wild like a goat on market day. They made a family of 3, bound by love, laughter, and the soft sounds of evening spent weaving baskets or shelling groundnuts. Their hut stood closest to the cattle pens, and perhaps that was why Ebel grew up loving cows before she even loved people. From the age of 5 she was drawn to them. While other children ran through fields or played games, Ebel sat quietly near the cows, humming songs her mother had taught her. The animals seemed to understand her, nuzzling her gently, never agitated in her presence. She named them all: Aya, the old one with the wise eyes, Hugo, the spotted one with a limp, and Naya, the youngest calf who followed her like a shadow. Villagers would laugh and say, "Ebel is half cow herself," but never with cruelty. It was part of her charm. Each morning, Ebel rose before the sun, slipping out silently while the world still dreamed. She would fetch water from the stream, singing softly to herself, and then bring the cows out to graze. While they fed, she sat beneath the baobab tree with her needle and string, repairing old cloth or plaiting her hair. Her mother scolded her sometimes, saying she should spend more time with girls her age, learning to cook or sew for her future husband. But Ebel would only smile and say, "The cows don't ask me to change." The village elders watched her with quiet curiosity. She had an ease about her, like a breeze that cooled on a hot day. The head herder, Papa Ikena, once told her, "You have a soul made of soil and sky, Ebel. That is rare." And it was true. Even the animals sensed it. Chickens moved from her path, goats nuzzled her fingers, and birds often landed near her, unafraid. But it was the cows who seemed most enchanted. They followed her voice, even from afar. They rested near her feet as though she carried something older than memory. When Ebel was not with the cows, she helped her mother prepare herbs and roots. She learned the power of scent and sound, how to make a fever fall, how to bind a wound with leaves. She asked many questions, not only of her mother but of the world. Why did the moon hide sometimes? Why did ants march in straight lines? Why did some people stop being kind? Her mind was as fertile as the soil she tilled, always searching, always dreaming. At night, under mosquito nets and stars, she told Abadike stories. They were always magical, tales of talking cows, dancing shadows, and girls who flew into the sky with birds. He listened with wide eyes, believing every word, for when Ebel spoke, the world always seemed more possible. And perhaps that was her truest gift, not her gentleness, not her connection with animals, but her belief that everything had meaning and everyone held magic, if only they were kind enough to see it. Festivals in the village were times of color and chaos. Drums would echo through the valley, and the women would tie their wrappers high, their laughter loud and unapologetic. Ebel never danced in the center but swayed at the edge, her smile brighter than the fires. She never cared for ornaments or beads, but she would often adorn the cows with flowers, whispering to them that they were the most beautiful creatures on earth. Once, during the New Yam festival, her mother caught her tying shells into Naya's tail. "People will think you've lost your mind," she laughed. But Ebel only said, "Let them think. She deserves to feel like a queen too." It was during one such festival that a distant relative came to visit. Her uncle, whom she had never met, accompanied by a man with sharp eyes and a cruel mouth. Ebel felt a chill when she saw him. His name was Okafor. He watched her not with admiration but with assessment, like a man choosing a goat at market. Her mother stiffened but said nothing. That night, Ebel could not sleep. Naya lay close to her by the trough, and even the calf seemed restless, snorting and twitching in her dreams. But in the days that followed, nothing happened. Life returned to its rhythm. Ebel continued to walk barefoot through fields, the cows trailing her like a royal entourage. She found solace in their eyes, comfort in their breath. To her, the world was a living thing, sacred and whole. Every leaf was a message, every gust of wind a song. And as long as she had her cows, her mother's smile, and her brother's laughter, she believed the world would always be good. She had dreams too, though she rarely spoke them aloud. She dreamed of owning a little herd of her own, of building a small school where children could learn about healing and the wisdom of nature. She wanted to teach them to see with more than just their eyes, to feel the soul of things. In her dreams, there was no punishment for kindness, no silence for those who spoke softly. In her dreams, the trough was a throne, the dust a crown. But dreams, no matter how tender, often stir the wind. And the wind was beginning to change. What Ebel did not know, what no one knew, was that the peaceful days she knew were numbered. That the man with the cruel mouth had spoken quietly to her mother that festival night. That the quiet agreement made in the dark would ripple into every corner of her life. That soon, her bare feet would no longer walk freely, and her name would no longer be spoken with laughter. But for now, she was still the girl the cows followed, the girl who sang to flowers, the girl who carried magic in her silence. And in this moment, this fleeting golden stretch of innocence, she was everything the world could be, if only it chose to be kind. It began on a morning heavy with the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The clouds hung low and swollen, casting the village in a dull gray light, and even the birds seemed quieter than usual. Ebel rose as she always did, before the sun had pushed its fingers over the hills, and tiptoed past her sleeping mother and brother to fetch water from the stream. The cows greeted her with soft grunts as she passed, their large eyes watching her with the familiar calm that steadied her heart. She didn't know that this would be the last morning her life would feel entirely her own. When she returned with the calabash balanced on her head, her mother stood at the doorway, lips pressed tightly together, her eyes avoiding Ebel's. And standing beside her was a man Ebel had only seen once before months ago during the New Yam festival. His name was Abadike, her mother's distant cousin. But now he stood like a rooted tree, arms crossed, his eyes cold and appraising. His presence darkened the threshold like a storm cloud too heavy to ignore. "Ebel," her mother said softly, but her voice shook, "this is your new father. He'll be living with us now." Ebel blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Her mother's husband had died years ago in the war, and there had never been mention of another. "Father?" she whispered. "But he's a stranger." "He is kin," her mother said quickly. "And he has offered us protection, food, and a better roof. You must welcome him." Abadike did not speak. He only stared, his jaw clenched tight, his fingers twitching slightly, as though resisting the urge to correct something with force. Ebel felt her skin prickle. The cows behind her stomped nervously in the dirt, sensing the shift in the air. That was the first sign. From the beginning, Abadike took control as if the house were already his kingdom. He moved his mat to the center of the hut, rearranged the kitchen stones without asking, and began speaking over Nena at the evening fire. He questioned everything: how much water was fetched, how long the yams boiled, why Ebel spent so much time with animals. "Are you a herder or a girl?" he snapped once when she returned home late with Naya trailing behind her. "Do you plan to marry a cow?" She bit her tongue, said nothing, but inside something trembled, not with fear, but with the understanding that she was no longer safe. The punishments began small. If the firewood stack wasn't arranged the way he liked, he would make her carry more from the forest until her fingers bled. If the cows made noise at night, he accused her of laziness and made her sleep outside with them even in the cold. "Since you love them so much, let them keep you warm," he said. Her mother looked away. Her brother, too young to understand, only watched with wide eyes, afraid to speak. As the days folded into weeks, Abadike's rule tightened like a snare. He forbade Ebel from leaving the compound alone. No more wandering to the stream at dawn. No more sitting under the baobab tree. Her feet, once free to roam where her heart pleased, were now bound by invisible chains. "A girl must be seen, not heard," he said. "And never heard outside." When she protested softly, he struck her across the face for the first time. Not with rage, but with the cold deliberation of a man teaching a lesson. Her cheek burned for days, but it was the silence in her mother's eyes that hurt more. That night, Ebel lay beside the trough, Naya nuzzling her hand as if to ask why the world had turned unkind. The cows remained her only refuge. With them, she still found traces of the old magic, the steady breath of Aya, the way Hugo blinked slowly when she hummed a tune, the way they always gathered near when she wept. But even that sanctuary did not remain untouched. Abadike began to treat the cows harshly, beating them when they didn't move fast enough, starving them if they moaned in the night. Useless beasts, he called them. As stubborn as their girl. He started locking Ebel in the hut when he left during the day. Sometimes he would tie a rope around her ankle and stake it to the ground like she was livestock. The rope chafed her skin, but the indignity of it chafed worse. She stopped speaking unless spoken to. She stopped smiling altogether. One evening she found her favorite calabash smashed in the dust. The one her mother had painted with moons and birds the day Ebel turned 13. She knew Abadike had done it, there was no question. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "To break the pride in your voice," he replied flatly. "A girl must learn to carry silence like water." Her mother grew quieter with each passing day. Once a woman of laughter and song, Nena now moved like a shadow of herself, her shoulders hunched, her spirit dim. Ebel could see the sorrow in her mother's eyes, but not once did she speak against Abadike. The villagers noticed, of course, but they said nothing. Some whispered that Abadike had once killed a man with his bare hands. Others claimed he had the spirits of war still living in his blood. No one interfered. Then came the worst of it. One night, during a heavy rain, Ebel awoke to find her mat soaked. Abadike had moved the roof tiles deliberately so the rain would fall on her place alone. "Since you are lower than the cows, sleep where they do," he said, dragging her outside into the storm. "You belong in the trough." He shoved her into the feeding basin, muddy and cold, filled with the stench of wet fodder. Her body hit the wooden edge with a sickening thud, and she cried out, but he turned his back and shut the door. Thunder cracked across the sky as she curled into herself, the rain soaking her through, the mud clinging to her skin like shame. But as the sky roared, something else stirred. The cows began to move. Slowly at first, then with purpose. Aya stepped forward and stood guard beside the trough. Hugo lay down in front of it, shielding Ebel's curled frame from the wind. Naya pressed close to her, wrapping her body around her like a blanket. They did not speak, but their presence was a balm against the cruelty of man. In their silence, Ebel felt protected, honored even. She could not explain it, but the cows had seen her suffering and chosen to stand with her. When dawn finally broke and the rain ceased, Abadike opened the door expecting to find a girl broken, humiliated. But instead, he saw Ebel rising slowly from the trough, mud-slicked but radiant in the golden morning light. And around her the cows bowed, not in fear but in reverence. Their heads low, their breath steady as though acknowledging something sacred. Abadike's eyes narrowed. He stepped back as if struck, then turned away without a word. That morning he didn't speak. He didn't beat her. He only watched her from the doorway, his face unreadable. Ebel said nothing either. But inside her, something had changed. She had been thrown into the trough as punishment. Yet when she rose, the animals had bowed. Not to shame. Not to weakness. But to the quiet strength of a girl who refused to shatter. And for the first time since Abadike had arrived, Ebel felt not broken, but chosen. The cows became her only warmth in the cold nights of punishment, their bodies surrounding the trough like ancient sentinels. Though they could not speak, they listened. Though they could not weep, they mourned with her in quiet presence. The moment Ebel had first laid in the filthy trough, mud-soaked and trembling, something within the herd had shifted. As if they sensed her pain was not like the pain of others. It was deeper, older, marked. The first to come near her had been Naya, the oldest cow, her coat speckled with the gray of years. Naya had walked over as Ebel curled into herself and simply stood beside her. No sound, no fear. Just closeness. The warmth of Naya's body offered a silent comfort no human had dared give Ebel in days. The cow's large eyes blinked slowly, and Ebel felt as if they saw not her suffering but her endurance. The other cows followed. One by one they gathered around the trough, not to feed, not to lie, but to surround her. There was no noise. No restless shuffling. They simply stood there as if creating a protective circle. Ebel had never seen them behave like this before. Cows were gentle, yes, but not ceremonial. Yet this gathering felt like a vigil. Not of animals, but of souls. When she raised her head from the wet hay, the cows slowly dipped theirs. Not all at once. One bowed. Then another. And then the rest, their broad necks lowering in unison as if in solemn respect. Ebel blinked, uncertain if the cold and hunger had made her delirious. But it happened again the next night. And the night after that. Even in sleep, they watched over her. She would wake with one lying close to her trough, breath warm against her face, heart beating slow and steady like a lullaby. Once, in the deepest hours of night, she felt a soft nudge at her hand. It was Naya again, licking the dirt and dried blood from her fingers as if to clean her wounds. Ebel didn't pull away. She let the gesture happen, tears slipping silently from her eyes, not from sorrow but gratitude. Her bond with them had always been quiet, even before the punishments. She had grown up among them, helping her mother milk them each morning before sunrise. She knew their names, their rhythms, their moods. She whispered her dreams into their ears long before she trusted humans with them. But this was something beyond. As if the cows had become more than beast. As if something old and watching had stirred within them. Strange things began to happen. The night she bled from her palm, accidentally scraping it on a nail in the trough, Naya had pressed her nose against the cut. The next morning the wound was closed, not fully healed but free from infection, as though the cow's touch had drawn the sickness away. Another night, the rain had poured relentlessly, flooding the edges of the cowshed. The trough should have filled with water, drowning her in her sleep. But not a single drop touched her resting place. The floor around her was wet, the hay soaked, but the spot she slept in was dry. When she woke and saw this, the cows were staring at her again, unblinking. And again they bowed. She began to hear things in the silence. Not voices exactly, but hums. Deep, gentle hums like lullabies carried on the breath of the earth. At first she thought it was just the wind between the wooden slats, but no, there was rhythm. A pulse. A pattern. She would hum it back, barely audible, and the cows would shift their ears as if in response. Their tails would flick, their hooves would tap the ground once, twice in time with her tune. She began to feel as if the earth itself was responding to her. Or through her. Word spread in whispers. A child in the village, sneaking to see the strange girl in the trough, claimed to see the cows kneeling in the night. Like they're praying, he said to his mother. She slapped him for lying, but she didn't sleep that night. Another woman swore she saw the trough glow faintly during a storm. That same night, Abadike's rooster refused to crow. The cow's silence was louder than thunder. Even Abadike grew uneasy. He stopped locking the cowshed. He stopped standing too close. He stopped looking into her eyes. Something about her calm frightened him more than any tantrum could. She wasn't broken. She wasn't begging. And the cows, his own animals, no longer responded to him. When he called them, they looked away. When he approached them, they walked off. When he entered the shed, they clustered closer to Ebel. One night, he raised a stick, intending to strike her even as she lay in the trough. But before the blow landed, Naya stepped between them. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply stood there, large and still, eyes fixed on him. And somehow that look, the unwavering ancient calm of a creature older than wrath, was enough to make him lower his hand. Ebel touched the cow's side gently, and again the others bowed. The villagers did not speak of what they saw. But they noticed. They looked longer when she passed. They paused when her name was mentioned. And they began to wonder, what kind of girl could make even beasts of burden rise for her? The answer lay in the silence. In the rhythm of hooves and breath and bowed heads. And Ebel, lying still in the trough, knew one thing for certain. She was not alone. Not anymore. At first, the village laughed. They laughed the way people do when they're afraid but don't want to admit it. Children ran past the cowshed in the early morning shouting cruel nicknames, Dung Princess, Cowgirl, Wife of Beasts. Their parents hushed them, but not out of kindness, out of fear that such names might one day stick to their own blood. The mothers would whisper behind their calabashes at the river, and the fathers muttered in low voices beneath the shade of palm trees. She sleeps in the filth and does not cry, one said. She's not right in the head anymore, another offered. The cows must have trampled her spirit. Or maybe, an elder muttered, squinting toward the cowshed, maybe something else sleeps with her. Rumors began to grow like weeds, fed by silence and the strange behaviors of the cows. These were not wild animals. These were livestock, bred to obey, to follow, to bow only to human command. Yet each night they formed a circle around Ebel's trough. Each night they faced inward as if protecting a queen. And most disturbing of all, they no longer acknowledged anyone but her. Auntie Ifoma tried to milk one of the cows early one morning while Ebel still lay sleeping. The cow turned its body sharply, almost crushing her leg, and refused to be touched. It was the same with the others. If Ebel did not approach, they refused to give milk, refused to feed, refused to move. They only responded to her. It was as if a new order had been written in a language no one else understood. Some villagers scoffed and spat at the ground. Witchcraft, they muttered. Demonic softness. Her silence hides a serpent's tongue. They said Abadike should beat the spirit out of her, that she was no longer just a girl, but a curse waiting to fall upon the land. But Abadike, the one who had thrown her into the trough in the first place, had grown quiet too. His face, once swollen with cruelty, now stayed shadowed with unease. He no longer beat her in front of others. He no longer shouted her name. And when the cows turned their backs on him, snorting at his presence, he simply walked away. There were others, though, fewer in number but stronger in gaze, who watched in silence, not with mockery but with wonder. Nkem, the weaver's daughter, stood outside the cowshed one evening and whispered, "They bow to her." She said it not in fear but awe. She came back the next day, and the day after. Others joined her, not openly, not proudly but quietly, pretending to pass by, pretending to be headed to the market or the stream, yet always glancing at Ebel. They noticed how the cows moved aside for her, parting like water at her steps. They noticed how her skin, though covered in dirt, glowed faintly in the moonlight. They noticed how even the flies left her alone. One boy swore he saw the cows kneel when Ebel rose for water, slowly together as if pulled by unseen strings of reverence. But fear and reverence lived close together in the village. The elders called a meeting. They did not mention Ebel's name directly, but the entire gathering centered around her. "This kind of silence is dangerous," one said. "She must be made to confess," another insisted. "Whatever spirit walks with her must be named." Abadike was summoned to explain why he let the girl continue living like this. "She is stubborn," he said flatly. "She welcomes the animals more than her own kind. If they love her so much, let them keep her." He chuckled after saying it, but it sounded hollow, like a man trying to laugh off a shadow clinging to his back. The chief's eyes narrowed. "And if they do? Will they also obey her over you?" Abadike didn't answer. That night a storm passed over the village. Thunder cracked, rain fell in sheets, and yet when morning came, the trough where Ebel slept was untouched by the flood. The cowshed, though open to the rain, remained dry only in the spot where she had lain. The earth around her was soaked, but not her bedding. A woman who saw it gasped and fell to her knees. "The rain parts for her." Another muttered, "No, no, that's not natural. We must send for the diviner." But the diviner, old and nearly blind, simply shook his head when summoned. Some spirits are not to be summoned. They reveal themselves when it is time. And so the village became split, not just in opinion but in heart. One half feared her, whispering tales of spirits, curses and omens. The other half watched with cautious hope, as if the mud-covered girl in the trough might one day rise as something more. Children still mocked her, but now they only did it when the cows were out of sight. Women still whispered, but their voices had lost some of their cruelty, replaced by uneasy wonder. Even the chief's wife came to watch from a distance, her shawl pulled over her head. And all the while Ebel said nothing. She rose with the cows. She slept in the trough. She walked as if led by an old rhythm. And wherever she went, the cows watched her with the same still gaze, deep, loyal, knowing. They bowed and the world watched. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that presses on the chest like a sleeping giant. Clouds cloaked the moon and even the wind seemed to pause. Ebel curled up in the cow's trough as she had every night since her punishment began, the straw beneath her damp but familiar. Her back ached from the wooden frame, and the air was thick with the smell of hay and animal warmth. Yet her eyes did not close. Something inside her stirred, a thrum in her blood, a pulse not her own. The cows were unusually still. They did not shuffle. They did not snort or shift their weight. One by one they stood facing her, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, not with light but with something deeper, something ancestral. Ebel slowly sat up. The air had changed. It was no longer the night she knew. It was thick with presence. Then the first cow, Nduka the oldest, knelt. Not to feed, not to rest, but in reverence. One by one the others followed. A slow ripple of movement, each knee touching the earth as if honoring royalty. Ebel's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes stung with sudden tears. This wasn't ordinary. This wasn't even natural. It was sacred. As she rose, the air shivered. And then the vision came, not like a dream, not like imagination, but like memory long buried. The cowshed faded around her, and in its place rose a wide field beneath a sky of stars brighter than fire. At the center stood a woman, tall, cloaked in shadow and starlight. Her skin was the deep brown of old earth, her eyes glowing pools of gold. Her hair fell like flowing ink, crowned with horns, not of evil but of power. Ebel knew without needing to be told that this was an ancestor. Not just of her family but of her spirit. "You were never meant to sleep low," the woman said. Her voice was wind and water and thunder. You were placed low so you would rise and all would bow, not to you but to the truth you carry. Ebel tried to speak but no sound came. Her throat burned with unspoken pain. The woman stepped forward, placing a single glowing finger on the scar on Ebel's hand, the one Abadike had made long ago. It flared with heat, then light, then ink. Your suffering is a scroll, the woman whispered, and the world will read your wounds. Suddenly the stars behind her rearranged themselves, into cows, into troughs, into girls standing tall before trembling men. A legacy written not in books but in bodies. In resilience. In silence that speaks louder than screams. When Ebel opened her eyes again she was still in the cowshed. The cows remained kneeling. The night was still quiet. But something had changed. The air around her buzzed with energy. Her scar pulsed softly, glowing with a faint shimmer beneath her skin, as if the spirit had left behind a mark, not for her but for the world to see. She stood. The cows bowed deeper. Even the wind began to stir, moving through the shed like a sigh of old spirits. The village, sleeping unaware, did not see it. But the earth felt it. The animals felt it. The stars did. And deep in her soul, Ebel understood, this was not just a night. This was a turning. Where once she was the girl in the trough, now she was the girl who stood while all else bent in acknowledgement. She did not smile. She did not cry. She simply stood, quiet and tall, as the daughter of the dust, the breath of the fallen, the living scroll of a story not yet fully told. At first it was only cautious glances. The kind that flicker when people are unsure, half fear, half awe. But Ebel never demanded anything from them. She moved through the village like a quiet stream, constant, calm and slowly carving her presence into stone. One morning a little boy named Chijiok followed her from the well. He didn't speak, just walked in her footsteps. When they reached the edge of the field where the cows grazed, he whispered, "My papa says the cows listen to you." She didn't answer. Instead, she knelt beside Induka and ran her hand gently across the cow's back. The great creature bowed, and the boy's eyes widened with silent wonder. He ran home breathless to tell his friends. The next day, more children watched her work in the fields. Soon, mothers who had once pitied her began approaching her quietly with small questions. About how she kept her garden alive, how the cows calmed in her presence, how she endured. Ebel never gave long answers. She simply shared her hands, her time, her steadiness. One woman, Abadike, came to her weeping. Her husband had beaten her for the third time that moon. Ebel said nothing. She walked with Abadike back to her home, cow hoofbeats following behind them like a quiet army. Abadike watched from afar, jaw tense, eyes narrowing as more and more people paused in the road to watch the girl who had once been the village's shame become its quiet strength. The cows began sleeping near her hut, though she no longer stayed in the trough. They grazed only in places where she walked. No fences held them, but they never strayed. Children began to tie ribbons in their tails, calling them Ebel's watchers. Elders who once scoffed now nodded in respect as she passed. She never raised her voice. She never pointed a finger. She simply moved with purpose and treated every soul, human or animal, as if it mattered. And in return, they began to see her not as a victim, not as a cursed girl, but as something else entirely. A bridge between earth and spirit. A girl whose kindness had teeth, whose silence had roots. By the time the harvest festival came, the women of the village gathered not around Abadike's fire, but beneath the tree where Ebel sat. They brought food, cloth and offerings. Not because she asked but because they wanted to. Because in her they saw themselves, broken, stitched back together and burning quietly with power. She had not sought allies. But she had become someone worth following. The air was heavy that evening as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Word had spread fast. Abadike was furious. He had heard of Ebel sitting beneath the sacred tree during the harvest prayers, where once only elders and men were allowed. He saw the ribbons in the cows' tails, the way villagers bowed slightly as she passed. She had not raised a weapon, but she had stolen something he could not stand to lose: fear. Control. The quiet obedience of a girl who no longer trembled when he shouted her name. He stormed through the village, shoulders tense, eyes wild. People stepped back, their faces stiff with concern, but no one warned her. No one had to. Ebel was already waiting. She stood near the cow's shelter, her bare feet planted in the earth like roots. Her hands hung by her sides, open, unarmed. But her gaze was steady, so unflinching that even Abadike hesitated before crossing the threshold between rage and reckoning. "You think you're someone now?" he spat. "Because they follow you? Because beasts bow to you?" The The cows behind her did not move. They stood in eerie stillness, watching him as one. Even the wind stilled. "You forgot your place," he growled, stepping closer. "You were nothing. A stain. I made you sleep in filth to remind you what you are." "You made me sleep where the purest creatures rest," Ebel replied quietly. "And they did not turn their backs like you did. They saw me." He laughed, bitter and loud, as though noise could break what silence had built. "You speak in riddles now? You've bewitched these fools with your soft words and your staring cows?" He lunged forward, hand raised, ready to strike as he had done before. But this time he did not reach her. The cows moved. 3 of them stepped between them, Enduka leading, hooves pounding against the earth, eyes burning with quiet rage. Abadike froze, suddenly aware of their size, their muscle, the raw power behind their stillness. One more step and he would be trampled. Not by men. Not by warriors. But by creatures he had once kicked aside like refuse. Ebel raised her hand, not to command them but to calm them. Her palm glowed faintly, the scar alive with light. The cows stopped, but they did not retreat. "Do you see now?" she said, voice low but unshakable. "You tried to make me a thing to step over. But the earth lifted me. The cows sheltered me. And your cruelty is no longer the law here." Villagers had gathered silently, drawn by the noise. Children peeked from behind mothers. Old men leaned on staffs. No one moved to help Abadike. No one defended him. The silence of the crowd was louder than any accusation. Abadike looked around, breathing hard, but the power he had relied on, fear, shame, loneliness, was gone. And in its place stood a girl he could no longer beat down. He dropped his arms slowly, as if suddenly feeling the weight of every blow he had ever struck. "You'll regret this," he said hoarsely, but it sounded like begging. "I already did," she answered. "But not anymore." He turned and walked away, cowed in a way he never imagined, by beasts, by people, by the girl he had tried to bury in filth. The cows remained in place long after he vanished into the night. The villagers stayed too, their eyes now fixed not on the man who ruled through pain, but on the girl who endured, who rose, and who stood surrounded by sacred beasts. Justice hadn't shouted. It had stood still and rooted. And the earth had listened. The village never quite went back to the way it was. Something had shifted that night, something permanent. The morning after Abadike vanished beyond the hills, never to return, no one dared speak of him loudly. His name became a shadow, passed in hushed tones as if even the syllables carried shame. But Ebel's name was another story entirely. Children woke early to gather near her hut, hoping to see her feed the cows or whisper to them beneath the rising sun. They asked questions now, bold ones. Did they really protect you? Did you sleep in the trough with them? Do you think the cows understand words? Ebel would smile gently, not answering everything but always listening. Her silence had once been mistaken for weakness. Now it was reverence. The elders, who had once turned away when she walked past, now invited her to council meetings. Not to speak over her but to ask what she saw, what she thought. It was not a formal rule, but every big decision came to feel incomplete without Ebel's quiet nod. Even when she did not attend, they left space for her under the baobab tree, a seat covered with white cloth and wildflowers. As for the cows, they became sacred. No longer were they just livestock. People began leaving offerings near the shelter: fruits, shea butter, carved wooden tokens. Women would bless their children by touching their foreheads to the cows' flanks. The beasts, ever calm, accepted it all with slow, blinking patience. Some swore that when danger approached the village, the cows would moo loudly or form a circle as if in warning. Whether it was truth or story didn't matter anymore. They were honored as the keepers of Ebel's rise. The old trough was never removed. Instead, it was polished and framed in carved wood. It sat in the center of the village square, not as a relic of humiliation, but a monument of endurance. At festivals, dancers would circle it barefoot, chanting her name, weaving her story into rhythm and step. Women especially changed. They stood taller. They spoke more freely. A small group formed around Ebel, widows, girls, mothers and daughters, who taught each other to read, to speak up, to plant their own food and defend their own homes. They called themselves the daughters of hoof and heart. Not warriors in the traditional sense, but powerful in their unity. Ebel never declared herself a leader. She wore no crown, carried no staff. But when storms came, people still checked to see where she was before taking shelter. And if a stranger arrived in the village, it was often said, "Speak kindly here. The girl of the trough still walks these fields." Years later, storytellers would come from distant towns to hear her tale. They would sit with the elders, sip palm wine, and listened to the story of the girl forced to sleep in a cow's trough, and how the cows bowed when she rose. Some added fire and magic to the tale. Others focused on the silence, the dignity, the invisible strength. Every version ended with the same truth: she was never broken. Old women whispered her name into the ears of baby girls. Boys learned to speak it with respect. The story passed like sacred cloth, from mother to daughter, father to son, not because of violence or vengeance, but because of the peace she carved from pain. Ebel never left the village. She didn't need to. The world came to her in awe, in gratitude, in hope. And she remained who she had always been, a girl with kindness in her eyes and earth on her hands, who once slept beside cows and rose with the power of legends. The cows still bowed long after. And so did everyone else.